Good day, everyone, and so happy to see you here every Tuesday on LinkedIn Live at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Have you ever wondered why women of color or diverse backgrounds code switch? A recent article I read on Harvard Business Review that stated broadly, code switching involves adjusting one's style of speech, appearance, behavior, and expression in ways that will optimize the comfort of others in exchange for fair treatment, quality, service, and employment opportunities. You might also be wondering what this has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. That excerpt illustrates the importance of assessing your values. Code switching can have its repercussions. Are you willing to do it short term? Is it long term? Are you gaining anything from it? Or are you unwilling to sacrifice your authenticity for an extended time? Knowing what you value for yourself and your career is imperative for deciding if and how to code switch. My name is Rochelle Carrier, and I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion advocate. And for a living, I help thought-provoking leaders and business owners implement DEI plans in their workspace. And if you tune in, not only will you have a better insight of our experiences, it will allow room for self-reflection. In our previous episodes for the month of August, we've been covering the topic about code switching, when we did it, how it helped or hurt us. So my personal share, the more I evaluated who I was, the more exhausting I actually found code switching to be. So my question to you, have you ever code switched? Today we have three special guests, and our first guest today is a headhunter. Dan built a career off of leveraging how top talent develops, grows, and progresses at each stage of achievement. Having recruited for executives and senior leaders nationally, and now leading her own recruitment firm, DG Recruit, Dan is excited to share the real life stories and learns of how one can fully maximize their full potential professionally and master job search techniques from a headhunter's perspective. You can always reach out to Dan on LinkedIn. Dan, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Rochelle.
You're welcome. So we're discussing code switching, and we all want to know, have you ever code switched?
Absolutely. And I never had that word until recently. And it is exactly what I do on a constant daily basis ever since I was a kid, because I'm an immigrant. I came here when I was 5 with my family, and I kind of re-immigrated back to China and then back. So in every single experience that I've been in, I had to adapt very quickly to the population's social etiquette, social behaviors, and learn to navigate each of those separate, very different cultures, whether it was at home, whether it was at school, whether it was eventually at work, whether it was eventually with clients who were usually triple my age. And obviously, as a salesperson, recruitment has always been a sales career. It's a thing that we teach, and we call it mirror matching. So code switching is as natural as breathing the air in my profession, because it's very hard to have one singular approach to everything, because everything is constantly changing depending on what you're trying to gain from the situation. Obviously, so I look at code switching as so many different categories, and it's a really necessary survival skill.
Right. Why do you think it's a necessary survival skill?
Because I think everyone's incentives and how they react to you is going to greatly change the outcome of any situation you're in. So again, this hinges back to the idea of survival, right? If I want to win a client over, and I'm 23 years old and I'm cold calling them on a phone line that they don't know who I am, me talking like, hey, I want to talk to you about that's not going to work. So I had to learn very quickly, okay, this is how I'm going to sound so that they're going to take me seriously as an adult and not a child. And I think that transition period, and a lot of people are like, oh, millennials, yeah, everyone's millennial bashing. It's because of this lack of ability to transcend our age groups and deal with the real world in a very aligned manner. So again, it's just a necessary skill to ultimately get what I want, which is the engagement and the respect from whoever I'm talking to. And another thing that I didn't share is I'm also a real estate investor. So I started investing in real estate when I was 25 years old off of the profits I made as a headhunter. And to do that, I'm 25 and my tenants are from a different socioeconomic class. It's just like so many differences that if I don't mirror match, it's actually going to put me in a problem, put me in a bad situation. So it's a method of protection and of just navigating the world and constantly shifting that approach.
Right. You're saying mirror matching. So can you explain what mirror matching is? I mean, we're talking about code switching, but I see where you're going. But for the audience, can you explain what mirror matching is?
Yeah. So if someone's speaking in a certain accent or a certain way, I don't alter my entire accent, but I do change my enunciation tactics. If I'm talking to an executive person, I'm going to speak in a very different way than I talk to someone who's a working mom, and I'm going to talk to her or him, a professional person in a certain situation. I'm headhunting them. I'm going to latch on to different things that we have commonalities in. And I'm going to try to identify the things that make this person feel comfortable. If it's an introvert, I'm going to change the way I speak as well versus an extrovert, right? There's just always these different components of what make up a person and that interaction. And I'm going to always keep an eye out for their behavior, and I'm going to moderate and adjust mine so that I'm on the same pace, I'm on the same wavelength. We're speaking and talking about similar things so that we have a pleasant engagement with each other.
We talked about making others feel comfortable. Do you think that makes people feel more comfortable and accepting who you are?
I think if you do it right, then yes. The problem is if you don't do it right, it can be easily viewed as manipulative or inappropriate. So it's all about how you do it. If you're trying to ingratiate yourself too obviously, and if you're flattering insincerely, people can feel that, and they're understanding that you're trying to leverage a tactic that isn't coming from a good place. So it's all about masking your intention. It's a lot of like acting from the way I see it. Like I have to genuinely, lucky for me, I genuinely am interested in people. Like it's not just like acting like I'm this, I really don't care about this person, I'm just acting interested. That's rarely the case with me. I genuinely am a people person. So I identified a career that allowed me to make a living off of this unique skill that I happen to do better than my peers, which has allowed me to last in this career longer than other folks who will find it draining, who will find it annoying. I've talked to lots of headhunters who, that's my business now. I headhunt other headhunters. A lot of people are like, I'm done. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I don't want to talk to other headhunters. I don't want to talk to another candidate. I could not even care about their life. So it's very hard to like mirror match and engage with someone if you genuinely don't care about that experience. And the day that you realize that is probably the day you shouldn't be in a sales facing role, because obviously that's part of the job. And I think that's a big reason why people quit the industry. It's just they're sick of it. They rather do something else that's less people engaging, because it is exhausting.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It is exhausting.
Yes, it's exhausting for people who find it exhausting. I don't find it exhausting. I can talk to anybody at any moment, at any time. I love it. I'm an uber extrovert. So I don't run out of energy. I love talking. It's my favorite thing to do. So this is a perfect career for me. And it's not for a lot of people who, again, don't want to stake their living. Obviously, we're in a commission-based role. They don't want to stake their living on this one skill set. And that's particularly the skill set that I love to do the most. But it's exhausting. It's tiring. It's exhausting. It is scary because you constantly have to play out all the scenarios in your head. Most of the time, you're overthinking things. So it is exhausting, but it's the choice I made going into a specific profession that allows me to do this all the time.
When you're among friends and family, who are you?
I have to constantly adjust myself as well, because
Right.
nobody is me. I'm not ever talking to someone who is me. I'm always talking to someone who's very, very different. So I always have to like remember who makes this person who they are, what makes them tick, right? When I'm talking to my austere parent from China, she has a very different view of what's acceptable communication versus what's not. So sometimes I forget about that because I'm so used to being free to do whatever the heck I want, say whatever I want. But when I'm back at home, there's a certain way I talk to my mother that I cannot do whatever I want, right? Like I always have to think, okay, how's she feeling? Because if I say the wrong thing, if I touch her ego incorrectly, she's not going to be happy, and it's going to be a very negative engagement. So even with family, there's that cultural dynamic. I think very much for people of color, I think for everyone, actually everyone's culture is so different, right? Like everyone, we have to, like, our family dynamic is unique. It's always, everyone has their unique family dynamic, no matter where you're from and what you do. So I do think with parents there's a certain way of engaging. With friends there's certain ways of engaging, because your friends will do things that you don't agree with. They think thoughts that you're not on board with, but you have to be able to tolerate that. So it's hard to just say what you think, always be yourself, and share a lot of things that, again, it's like, is it solicited? Is it unsolicited? Right? Why put someone through an uncomfortable situation? What does that achieve?
Right. What does it achieve? Right. Well, our next guest, she's been with us before, and I'm so happy to have her back again. Maida Surya. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So she recently finished her master's degree in human resource development. She was born in Indonesia, but grew up in Singapore. She was in the United States for the past 7 years for her undergraduate and graduate degree, and returned back home to Singapore this year. She recently started as a DEI advisor at Crescendo DEI and is always open to conversations relating to DEI folks. Maida, welcome again, and thank you so much for coming. We understand that you are back home, you're in Singapore, and there is a time difference. I really appreciate you coming on the show again.
No, yes, for sure, and I'm honored to be here twice.
So our question is, and as you heard us, speak with Dan, have you ever code switched? And do you find yourself consciously doing it? And how has it affected you? And are there advantages to code switching?
Yeah. For me, my experience is pretty unique. So for me, like, as you can tell, like, my accent is this way, and not a lot of people are familiar, but in Singapore, our first language is English, but there's this thing called Singlish. So you can try to Google that and kind of listen to what that sounds like. And when I first came to the US, it was really difficult for people to understand me. I had to like repeat myself 3 to 5 times, like each time I'm speaking. So I got really frustrated, and naturally my accent just kind of changed over time. And it is difficult in the sense that even for when I came back to Singapore, like each year to like visit and kind of reconnect with like my friends and my connections, then they kind of go, oh, like you're switching your accent and things like that. So I get called out on these things, and then I did feel this sense of a misaligned identity, or kind of like an identity crisis, because then now they're kind of saying like, oh, you're not really Singaporean enough. And I know that is a very common Asian American experience. You're not Asian enough. You're not like American enough. And so there is like that piece as well. And I think perhaps there are, I would say in general, code switching is not exactly or necessarily a bad thing. I think what Denden was saying in terms of being adaptive to like the situation and like how people interact, and I think at the end of the day for me, the goal would be how do I effectively communicate with somebody else. But at the same time, in terms as a DEI professional, I also think about systems a lot. And so I think it is this like very complicated and nuanced thing. So I will try my best to not make it too complicated. But I think when we try to adapt and assimilate and kind of use the language that the system wants us to, it does kind of like make us gear towards a way that the system wants us to win, and when that is not supposedly how we like our culture and all of those things like want us to act, right? So
Right.
there is that that level of nuance as well, and I think it is very complicated because I think there are advantages in terms of like I can perhaps move up in this organization, but if I have to give parts of my identity away to move up in the organization, does that fulfill me at the end of the day? So there is a lot of that, and I will kind of just like perhaps pause there for now in case I um, end up making this more complicated.
Right. So you are aware that you are code switching then. And, Dan was saying because she's such a people person that, she tends to mirror match. Do you find you do the same as well?
Um, I would say like in a more contextualized version, like in Minnesota, there's something called Minnesota Nice, and they're very proud of it. And it basically means that folks are very passive aggressive in the way that they communicate. And I think, again, as somebody who is like in the DEI space, sometimes I try to adapt, but at the same time, it makes me feel icky about myself that, oh, like for example, when somebody wants to ask for a favor, like they will kind of beat around the bush when at the end of the day I would kind of just say, oh, so this is what you want, and then sometimes they'll take that tone as me being aggressive and all of those things, and so it can be really difficult in that sense. So yeah, it is like hard. I think that what you were saying in terms of like mirror matching, I find myself unable to do that because that's just my personality. I'm more direct, I'm more like to the point, but I've also found myself to be more softer and mellowed out because I've been in Minnesota for 7 years. So I can't just go around being I want to be unapologetic, but again, I have to do it more in a way that's effective, right? Like where people want to listen to me, where I'm getting my point across, and if I'm stubborn in the sense that this is the way that I speak, I'm not going to compromise that, then I'm just going to lose the engagement with people, the message that I want to get across to like the table or like whatever spaces that I'm in.
Right. Oh, interesting. And so now you're in Singapore, and I know it hasn't been probably long enough since you've been there because you recently moved back. Do you find now your more authentic self?
So that is a very difficult question. I think I'm finding myself more alone because, like, as somebody who's been kind of like out and about of like my home country,
Right.
I find that like my friendships has also kind of faded. Like, folks are more used to kind of catching up with me instead of like hanging out with me. So I was actually back in Singapore for 10 months during COVID,
Right.
and I was slightly disappointed that I was like, oh, I at least would have friends that I can hang out with, and that wasn't the case because like the interactions has just been different, and I've changed over time as well. And I wasn't somebody that immediately jumped into DEI from the day I was born. It was something that I was more interested in and like passionate about in the past like 3 to 4 years. So I think that shift in like my focus in terms of where I want to focus my work on, my passions and all of that has also shifted how I interact with other people. So to other people, I have changed. So so there is that piece as well. So it is very difficult for me because I guess it's like that philosophical question of who, like, what is the version of my true self? Because of like the people that I'm interacting with, they're all folks who are always very different than myself.
Right. Right. I see Stacy shaking her head. Stacy, welcome to the panel. We're going to definitely touch up on a lot of things you said, Maida. Thank you for sharing your personal experiences. Stacy, uses her identity as an Asian American Pacific Islander to bring attention to the unique experiences BIPOC and their intersectional identities have in the corporate workplace. She has 5+ years of facilitation experience and trained peers and colleagues on important DEI topics as a core member of the Inclusion and Diversity Employee Resource Group at Accenture. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Accenture.
Yes, that's right.
Her hope is to help create truly diverse, equitable, we'll go back to that, and inclusive workplace cultures that go beyond hitting the quota, one vulnerable conversation at a time. She is currently the COO of WorkHap, Asia's #1 career coaching and training company. Stacy, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Rochelle, and Maida and Dandan. Thanks so much for sharing. It's been awesome listening to you, and I can definitely relate to a lot of what you both have been saying.
So code switching, you said you can relate. So have you or are you constantly code switching?
Yeah, I will try to keep this brief since as I said, resonate a lot with what Dandan and Maida had said. But, I used to be very self-conscious about the fact that, I can adapt to different types of people, different groups of people. My peer circle is very diverse, I would say. I am originally from Los Angeles. I moved to the East Coast in Washington, D.C. for about 3 years and, recently just moved back to LA. And I, didn't really notice this about myself until in the last maybe like 2 or 3 years. And again, I used to be very self-conscious because, as Maida said, it's just kind of like you're going through an identity crisis, right? And the way we treat our coworkers, our friends, our family, it's all very different. But I think more recently, I've been trying to see if I myself am feeling authentic in all of these relationships. And I do feel that way. And so instead of feeling self-conscious about it, I do see it as more of a strength. Dan had mentioned this, and then another guest on your panel last time, Rochelle, had mentioned this as well, but code switching is a survival tool, for Black, Indigenous people of color to, I guess, get what they want or advance in a mostly like white workplace. However unfortunate that is, right, which it is. I think specifically for Asian Americans, it goes back to, and I also don't want to complicate this a lot, so I'll pause after this point, but for Asian Americans specifically, I think it goes back to just like assimilating into American culture, right? And our parents, our, past generations, they've done so in a way where it kind of played into that like model minority, identity that so many of us like grew up knowing maybe briefly about, but didn't know how much it actually like hurt us.
Dan, you're shaking your head, and every time, Stacy, you said we won't get into it. Now we're getting into it. We need to get into it because I'm sure a lot of everybody in the audience wants to hear. So Dan, you're shaking your head. So what is it about integrating that makes it difficult or cultural? 'Cause I mean, I did it, but for you as an Asian American, can you go into that with us?
Yes. So to Stacy's point about like the model minority, especially as women, that's an extra degree of my model, right? Just women in general, whether you're white, Black, Asian, you are expected to be more obedient than boys. So that alone, gender is one big expectation, plus that extra model minority component. So the Asian people in the workplace are always looked at as hard workers. You could just pile on the work because they're so eager to win that assimilation. And our parents are so desperate for us to gain that assimilation that they almost prep you for it. They're like, just do it. Just do it, because that's also what they did in, whether it's communist China, that whole generation of their survival was very much do as you're told, top down. Then you have the whole Confucius thing. It's an additional kind of cultural thing. And a lot of us, like myself, my parents are Chinese. I speak Chinese. I read and write Chinese. I lived in China. So there's that cultural element of that top-down approach that isn't common in the US, right? The US, you call adults by their first names from a child, right, standpoint. In China, we do not call adults by their first name as a child. So just that one cultural difference, I think it's a very hard thing for Asian American children in America to have a one-on-one conversation with an adult. It's very hard because that's not something we're not allowed to speak at home, right? If I have a gripe against my mother, she doesn't want to hear it. I have no right to speak. She'll literally say, you're not allowed to talk. You just do what you're told. So we don't have a dialogue at home. And I think this is why I love talking so much, because I was like, finally, I can talk outside of home. Right? This is why I went into sales, because I'm like, oh, what a great career to just get away from all that. Right? Like I had this very rebellious attitude towards what my home life was like. So I had to learn through observing other people. I mean, how do I talk to an adult? Right? And thankfully in high school, we had opportunities to interview for internships, and that helped. Just that exposure of like, oh my God, adults are not this like secret entity. They're just normal people. You can just talk to them like a normal person, like a peer. That was news. So I think for being Asian Americans, that's a unique situation that I don't know. I'd love to hear if other cultures, I think certainly from what I've heard, African cultures, immigrant cultures, right? It's like strong parents that were very go-getters. They expect their children to be excellent, right? They have high standards. They really beat down on their kids. So I think that's probably common with some immigrant communities where, the people who made it out came here, have a certain attitude and expectation of what their kids need to accomplish. And that kind of survival kind of drives their children to act a certain way. And we have to find out how we're going to react to that.
Right.
We have to figure a way out of our own parental trap. And kind of how were you going to react to that?
Right. Maida, I see you shaking your head. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it is really tough, and I can't speak for the Asian American experience because I don't grow up there, and I like grew up more so in Singapore. But I was very lucky that my parents are not the quote unquote typical Asian. There's a term called tiger parenting or like helicopter parents, where
That's what I was thinking.
there's like very high expectations. So my parents weren't like that. They were kind of like, as long as you are out there in the world, great. But a lot of my peers were definitely in that boat where their parents are making them do all sorts of things, like multiple musical talents, multiple sports talents. I had none. So it can be really tough. I think that there is actually a whole study of this in terms of like the different characteristics in different countries. So like power distance and as like one example, and so in some countries, like Asian countries, and that I can speak about, would be kind of like that power distance. Like in certain communities like Korea and Japan, it is very common for people to ask for their age, because if somebody's 1 year older than myself, then I have to address them by this like particular what is the word, like vernacular, or like there is like a particular way I have to speak to them, and I have to treat them as like my senior and somebody that I like look up to, even though the only thing that's different is age. And I think it is just different in terms of like where you come from. And so that can be really interesting in terms of like working with different cultures, like globally. But I think within the US, it does get very complicated, because if you've grown up in a US society, like part of like certain communities will want to try to go against like, this is how we should be doing things. But then part of the other parts of the community would kind of say like, well, this is how this at least seems more progressive than what I have experienced in the past. But at the end of the day, there is like this bigger systemic issue that still comes into play. So it is very like insidious, very complicated, and there's just a lot of like layers that piles on to like why this, like even this topic on code switching can be very, very complex.
Right. There's someone, Lynn said something here. She's saying, does anyone on the panel think they would have had the same career or school success advancements without having engaged in code switching or mirror matching?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
the
anybody
question.
could answer that. Anybody.
I'll let Stacey go first.
Yeah, no, it's a really great question, Lynn. And to be honest, I don't think so. Unfortunately, like as Manda said, I think a lot of it is systemic. I think for me personally, I think in my household, we are for me, I'm an only child, with my parents, I was very eager to please. And I think that trickled into different aspects of my life. And so I did feel the need to match someone's energy, match the way they are talking, make them feel comfortable, right? And I think someone had mentioned in a previous panel that you did, Rochelle, that, doing that, if you're dimming your own light to make others feel comfortable, how sustainable is that, right? It's not. And, I think, sorry, I'm going a little bit off topic, but
no, don't worry.
Yeah, I definitely think that where I'm at in my career, I wouldn't have been able to do this without code switching. However, I hope that, I think like people being more aware of themselves and being more aware of that and like trying to show up more authentically, having these kinds of conversations and bringing attention to some of these, cultural, systemic, personal experiences that we've had, just kind of makes people think more about the way they are showing up at school, at work, in their friend groups and things like that. Because people change. Like I've changed for the last couple of years, and even realizing that about myself has been very
eye-opening.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You said something interesting earlier. It trickles on into other relationships. That was a big trigger for me when you said that, because it made me think of how of a people pleaser I was throughout my entire, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ladies, throughout my entire, I'll be 50 in November, so all my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you realize and you become self-aware and start creating boundaries and realizing that having a voice, especially women of color or women of diverse backgrounds, is necessary for us, that we're able to empower others, right? We're able to empower others. And I think it's definitely a learning process. I wasn't born in Haiti. My parents were born in Haiti and they left. They left in the 60s, and it was a dictator at the time. And it was a Duvalier regime at the time. So they literally escaped. And, like all of you have said, they had to integrate, assimilate. Thankfully we had the French language. And it's funny you're saying, I tend to, when my family comes in from Haiti or from Europe, I tend to mimic their accent. And I don't realize I do it until I get off the phone. And I use expressions in Creole. I think my more authentic self comes out among my Haitian family and friends. And I can really, be who I was born to be. And then if I have a lot of European friends, and I find even my accent in French changes. And being from Montreal, because I lived there for 35 years, if I speak to my French friends there, so there's three different accents already that I'm assimilating. And it's the same language. It's the same, right? Dan and Maida? And that part is not exhausting, because I found even when I went to Europe or Italy or Belgium, I always made sure that I learned the language so that people can see that I'm willing to come to you in that way, so that I could be serviced respectfully and well. So, right, Maida? So you agree?
Yeah, no, I think that was kind of the distinction I wanted to like make, and you kind of put it in a clear way, where the difference between, for example, assimilating to a white supremacist culture is that there's this entitlement by white people and you're talking about traveling too, where they expect people to speak in English, for example, right? And so what you're saying is that on the other hand, like in some levels of code switching where it can be great, it's like if folks are willing to come to where you're at, then I think that's where that difference lies. So when you said that, I was like, oh, yes.
Right. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I guess with like respect to accents and just communicating with people, back to the point of it being like a survival instinct, I think humans, and tying together what Stacey was saying about being liked, right? Like we all want to be accepted. We all want to make friends at work. We want to make friends at school, right? Like there's certain things we know that, like when I was younger, I was much more, I don't care. Like I will offend you. I will yell and scream until I get my way. Because I was feeling out like how to get what I want. And eventually, the older I got, the more I understood, like, oh, it's about diplomacy and being liked. And like, so then eventually I had to learn, like, how do I communicate? Like, I actually care what they think. And so that was something like when in college, we took this DISC assessment. And literally all my assessments, like, you do not care what other people think. You have very little empathy. So that was something I had to learn as I continued to grow into a career that rewarded empathy, right? Like, if you can connect with your prospect, you'll get more, right? You'll get more referrals, more business. You'll win their trust and their loyalty. So again, it's just tied to survival. I think whether you're compensated on a commission basis or not, like being liked is a very important life skill. Interviews are all about likability. So yes, when I connecting, yeah, like when I talked to one of the interviewers during college, she was a art major and she was in the arts, like, school plays and whatnot. That's automatically just like, oh, we're going to talk about that all day. Is that my number one favorite thing in the world? No, but I picked up on, okay, this is something this person cares about. This is going to be my in. So back to Stacey's point about being liked, it can hurt. And back to your point, Rochelle, about like, always earning people's respect and striving for that. It's an unmet need from my childhood, from my parents. It's an unmet need.
Wait a second. You said it's an unmet need. You have
validation. Yeah, like I never got that from my parents. Like my mom never told me she loved me, right? So when I go to work, I'm looking for that validation. Like, love me, love me, love me. Tell me I'm good. Tell me I can do this. And the more people gave that to me, the more I worked. And so I became this like workhorse, right? Because I kept going for that carrot. And then when you get older, it's like, when are you going to start asking for yourself the worth that you are required, right? So again, this is double whammy for women and minorities. Double whammy. It's just that need for validation plus the reward for working hard equals I'm going to keep shutting my mouth and doing what I'm told because I'm trying to navigate through the system so that I can survive, so that I can achieve my goal, which is having a lifestyle that I want, right? So you do have to take a lot of crap because unfortunately, like a great example is real estate and my boyfriend. I have a few properties and he just got his first property. The way he talks to his tenants, completely different than the way I speak to my tenants because I'm a young woman, So the way he's like, I can be off my authentic self. I'm like, yes, because you have a deep male voice, right? You have a deep male. Hi, I expect you to move the things from the hallway. They're like, okay, all right, I will do that. How am I going to get that same result? I have to lower my voice. Hey, listen, I told, like, this is just like a survival mechanism, right? So it's very challenging. I do think, for better or for worse, this is just something that we have to deal with.
Right. Please correct me. There's someone here. She's an audience, and Stacy, it's actually for you. Is it Zin Yi Yap? Xin? Do I pronounce it Zin? Is it Zin?
Oh, Sinyi, I know her.
Sin Yi. Okay, so it's Sin Yi Yap. Stacy, it's for you. She said, the trauma and oppression stops with us, and we all have different ways of doing so. For some, it means not covering and being present authentically. For others, it is through subtler ways. She said, what is the and the same, you said Sin?
Sinyi, yeah.
Sinyi. What is the panelists' take on your roles in the model, minority, myth, and Asians' role in the overall movement of achieving equity for all?
And this is for me.
This is for you, or anybody who's willing to conceptualize all of this.
Okay. Can you repeat that last part of the question again, if you don't mind?
So here she says, what is the panelists' take on your roles in the model, minority, myth, and Asians' role in the overall movement of achieving equity for all? From an Asian perspective, how can you achieve equity for all? So probably it would be, in society, in the workplace, right? And people you interact with.
Yeah, I think this is just me personally speaking. Of course, my experience is like East Asian American. Los Angeles has a lot of minorities, and I did grow up in both spaces, predominantly like white and predominantly Asian spaces. And I think first and foremost, I personally, my parents just kind of like tune out the news, and it's just kind of like out of sight, out of mind. As long as it doesn't bother us, like, don't worry about it, right? But I think the more I become educated, the more I read and tune into like what's going on, that's not sustainable. Like, I think just being ignorant to everything, sure, like you probably live an easy life. You probably live like pretty comfortable life. But me personally, like, I'm extremely empathetic, a little too much sometimes. So I personally like can't live that way. I think like with self-awareness, I think comes with a lot of loneliness, I think, too, because you realize you're different from others. And, I think my personal take on it is just having more of these conversations with my peers who are, not so in tune with the news and what's going on with like Stop AAPI Hate, and, Black Lives Matter too. Rochelle, you and I had talked about this offline, but I had seen a lot of rhetoric online about, oh, well, like BLM, like what about Asians, like things like that. Like that's not the point, right? Like the point is like equity for all. And, a lot of the civil rights movement, like for Asians, like we wouldn't be here. I mean, a lot of marginalized communities, like we wouldn't really be here today without the work of the, Black civil rights movement, like in the 60s, right? And it's just kind of like recognizing that and realizing that the fight isn't against each other and other marginalized communities. The fight is against like white supremacy.
Maida, you're shaking your head.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I would definitely like add to that, where it can be really difficult with the model minority myth, for example, because the model minority like concept was ascribed to Asian Americans by white people. And so I think there is that distinction that has to be made. And what Stacey was saying is that at the end of the day, it still benefits like white supremacy, right? Where if minorities or the Black and Asian tension rises, who does it benefit at the end of the day? Still white supremacy. So, but the difficult thing about the model minority myth as an Asian person is that it kind of feels like, at least for me personally, you're either that or you're not, or you're trying to go against it. If you're either loud and boisterous, or you succumb to the silence, and you put your head down and like work hard. And it feels like there's nothing in between. And I mean, there definitely is, but at least to the external eyes, it just doesn't feel like there is. And I think Stacey was saying too, like all of us here are East Asian women, so folks who look more like us. But Asia is like, we are a diaspora, and it is also extremely complex in the sense that we have a lot of like colorism, elitism within our own communities. And sometimes it's like, sometimes it's a joking way, but it is problematic when they're like, oh yeah, certain like Koreans are better than like this group of Asian people, and we are also not inclusive of our own communities, or of like folks who are in the Central, West, South Asia like areas. Like South Asians have to have their own category of South Asians, right? So folks from like India, Pakistan, and other regions in that area. So we have a lot of work internally within ourselves as well, where I mean, just like, oh, sorry.
No, it's exactly. I had that conversation with a friend of mine. She's Muslim. And exactly what you said. Internally, there is already systemic racism. Why, though? Because of colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
So in colonialism, they pit us against each other. And then they left.
Exactly.
Right? So there's colorism in Haiti between the darker skin, the lighter skin, the one who had the blue eyes, the one who had the green eyes, the one who has the light brown eyes, the one who had the caramel color eyes, the one who had the straighter hair. Everybody along the hue is treated differently. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, to add a wedge to it, like race is also a construct. So, and I mean, like, and that's kind of like what is put upon us, right? Like folks of color, like, and for us to feel like we have to, act a certain way. I mean, I'm trying to like bring it back to the topic of code switching. Is also like an agency or the force of like the system of like wanting us to, feel like this is what we have to do. And I think that is kind of it is complex, because there are a lot of folks who would internalize that, and they're like, oh, this is what I need to do to survive, to be successful. And back to that first question that I believe Lynn asked, and I wanted to bring up the point of, I am a younger professional, and so I am a beneficiary of all the work that has been done in the past. And to Lynn's question of, do you have to compromise yourself? For me, no, because I know that that's what people before me have been fighting for. Like, don't compromise yourself. And the more people compromise themselves, the more backward this work is gonna go. So having more people being unapologetic towards themselves, and kind of just being their authentic self, and all of that type of behaviors is gonna encourage more of this like breaking of the system.
Right. Dandan, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Is it Dandan or Dandan?
Oh, it's Chinese is Dandan, but English people call me Don, Dandan.
What's the correct pronunciation?
To keep it simple, I'm always telling people like, just call me Don. It's the closest to. Some people call me Dun, but it's like Dandan is the Chinese
Dandan.
way. So, yeah, so the closest
Dandan.
in English sometimes is like Don or Dun, like.
Okay. And does it bother you when people mispronounce your name? I know for me, it's a huge thing, but for you?
I'm so used to it. It doesn't
Are
bother
you?
me because
Okay.
Chinese is a unique language, and unless
Right.
you know it, you would not know. Like Xing, that's Xing. Like Chinese
Right.
is such a different language.
Right.
I don't care because I really genuinely don't care. Like
Right.
because I'm in a people facing role, so I talk to hundreds of people per
Right.
week. So my clients that buy, like people call me Dan Dan, and I'm like, I don't care. Like I
Right.
don't care. Like
Right.
it's not something I care to. It just happens. Wait, I just am too people facing to care.
Okay. Monique says, let them call you by your name. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I don't have the time to like.
Right.
It's just not
Yeah.
a big thing on my priority list. Like I just need to get it done. So like when I talk to my
Right.
lawyer, I'm like, yeah, I don't care. They're like, hi Dan Dan. I'm like, cool. My accountant calls me Dan. Like I've been working with them for years. I don't care because
Right.
it's a unique name, and like
Right.
I don't. It doesn't really bother me. But I do
Mm.
understand the debate about names, and I
Right.
understand that. It just doesn't personally matter to me.
Right. Okay. Okay. I wanted to make sure. Stacy,
Yeah.
and she actually, it's Sin Yi. She said colonialism and imperialism both. Great point, Rochelle. Monique Arrington says, love the point Stacy just made. So it's interesting. So Sin Yi just said, it's because it's tiring to care, or you don't care.
Like you said, just too many people that I have to talk to. I
Right.
don't have time to
Right.
correct people, and it just doesn't really achieve any means to an end. Like it's
Right.
not my duty to teach them how to speak Chinese. If they want to learn it, they should. Like they should learn
Right.
it. Like I just don't care to even give them the education.
Right.
Like it's just not my problem. Like you have a problem pronouncing words, that's your issue.
Right.
Like
It's funny you said education. We had a couple of conversations since these shows, these lives have started, and I know we're going off topic about code switching a little bit, but to go back to, educating, do you find any of you, I mean, I've done it. I don't do it anymore because it's exhausting. And like you said, I let people do their own research on Haiti. And, going back to the point, I think it was Stacy, you said, I personally don't watch the news. I select what I'm going to read in a more beneficial way. I want to know about the history, the colonialism, imperialism, what made us who we are, where we are, and the broader picture. So it's the news doesn't help you see the broader picture. And unfortunately, there's so much negative news on my country, on your country, that you only see it as a certain way, so I don't want to educate people anymore. Like you said, they need to do their own research and read books and find out who we are, where we came from, what influences we've done, how we've made things differently. Yes, we have doctors and lawyers and scientists and but do we see them here a lot in America due to the systemic racism? Maybe not. Are we prone to having more roles that are, different here in America than maybe all of your parents did? Probably, So I think it's their civic duty to really educate themselves on on diversity, right? But having these shows as well, I think also benefits us all.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve.
I wanted to like add a little bit to that, Rochelle. Yeah, I think first of all, especially with the pandemic and all of that, it's just so important to know where your news is coming from. And then I'll stop there. Second of all, I think I agree with both of you, like Dantan and Rochelle, that it is not on the onus of people of color, marginalized communities to educate, the people who are benefiting, from the system on our culture and things like that. And Maida, I think you can probably relate to this too, but I think that's kind of one of the things I grapple with as being like a DE&I professional. It's like, yes, we want to like educate you on like all the ways the history, the colonialism, all of that, how it affected the United States, and even kind of Maida touched upon this earlier, but within Asia itself, right, there's so much like ethnic racism that sits there. And it's just kind of exhausting for sure. But yeah, that's something I'm kind of still working through. And if people are in the comments, can comment and let us know how you're feeling too, if you're in that space too. Because this is something I frequently talk about with other peers who are in DE&I, and it's definitely challenging, but it's nice
Right.
to relate and talk to
Right.
shared experiences.
So going back, yeah, the shared experiences, it's interesting when we go back to code switching, and probably goes back to what Lynn was saying. Does it increase your likelihood? Let's call it mirror matching, because I like that new word. Let's call it mirror matching. Do you think it increases the likelihood of being hired? Anybody can jump in.
Oh, sorry, the question was, when we mirror match, does it increase the likelihood of being hired?
Being hired, yeah.
I think if you do mirror matching very well, absolutely, it will get you what you want. But the question is that what you want? Right? Like if you're going to like sales, that's my world. Very bro-y, very like macho, alpha, blah. Like I'm kind of like that. I'm very competitive. I'll freaking hit you in the face. Like I'm a freaking aggressive person. So it's aligned. And so mirror matching is natural, it's authentic, it's what I want. We have the same goal. So I think what's really bad is when people try to sell themselves as something they're not just to fit in. And then it leads to an unhappy experience for everyone, because that's not what we signed up for, right? Like me as an employer, I'm this type of person, and hopefully we naturally align. And if so, mirror matching is going to help you get that edge to get the job. But if we're not aligned and you force your way through manipulative means, everyone's going to be down the line disappointed with each other because
Right.
It was an authentic match to begin with.
Right. Do you think it helps employees? Let's be real. Does it help Asian employees be seen as leaders?
Oh, I don't think so, because
Okay.
like part of the strongness of the model minority myth is that it has painted us Asian folks as non-leadership material. So I remember speaking to somebody, and obviously I can't disclose anything, and they were talking about how their organization's entire like APAC, which stands for like the Asia Pacific like region, is part of the core pillars is to out of like all the other regions, is to get them to be leadership material. So inherently they're already thinking of Asian people as non-leadership material. And sure, like we do get into the organizations, but we don't move up very much because you're not leadership material enough. And I think a lot of like Asian folks, Asian American folks can like relate to being part of that experience, having that experience of having somebody else being promoted rather than yourself. And so there is like that distinction there for the experiences that we face.
Right.
I can add to that too, and it kind of ties back to something we touched upon earlier, but it goes back to like our cultural upbringing, right? Like being very respectful to our elders and not talking back and things like that. Like those are things that, I've talked about in the workplace and to my peers who are Asian American or Asian, like that's something we need to unlearn in order to move up in the workplace, because there's just a lot of like generational trauma that just, we have. And yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree 100%. There's a book actually about that. A doctor wrote it. I have it here in my library, and he talks about exactly that: generational trauma being passed down through the DNA, through the placenta, through the bloodstream for generations and generations. And unlearning it, like you said, is a bloody process. because
Yeah.
it's in your DNA. So you're reconstructing your actual fundamental core or belief system. And it's I don't want to use brainwash because I do it to myself. I find myself saying something because of my cultural upbringing in my mind. And then I have to reaffirm it and change it so that the dialogue switches, so that whatever comes out of my mouth switches, so that I can get what I want, which is what Dan was saying, So are we, and I'm African American, I'm Haitian, Caribbean. We don't have that many leaders either, but coming out of all of this and unlearning it will, I think, enable us, to be able to be leaders. Because like you said, it's, we have subservient roles. We have subservient roles. And it's interesting, Dana was saying, I'm aggressive and this is how it is. It's basically what's going to get you really far in life, because you're the only one who can advocate for yourself.
Yeah. I think back to one of the questions somebody posed earlier about like, what can you do? Like, I think of it as two things, micro and macro. On a personal level, what can you do when faced with the opportunity to prove somebody wrong about a stereotype that they have? I always jump into that opportunity. I've gotten to verbal arguments, screaming matches with people shamelessly. When someone makes ching chong noises at me, when somebody aggressively approaches me, I'm like, hit me, do it. Like, let's get into it. Let's fight. Because I want to show them, like, you thought it was going to be like, not a big deal. I was just going to roll over. I'm going to scream. And you are going to feel it, right? Like, and I've had lots of racist incidents where I've screamed and shouted and like cursed, yelled, just to be like, today you met somebody who's not going to take it today, right? Like, you probably pick on Asian women a lot. Well, today you have a surprise waiting for you. Surprise, right? So I love those moments. It's a cheat. People are like, don't do that. It's not safe. I'm like, I have the privilege of speaking and shouting very loud and very strong physically. So I have a lot of privilege that allows me to do that. And I recognize my privilege. All right. Right. So I understand I have this privilege. So what can I do with my privilege? I can create content. I can do these panels. I can speak up. Like, there's a micro element. Like, when my parents complain about Black people, I can confront them and have an argument and scream and shout. There's a lot of internal racism in my household. Grown up with very racist parents, I've disagreed with them from day one. They've never liked the fact that I have minority friends. They're like, why hang out with minorities? I'm like, I'm a minority. I connect with minorities. Like, because we grew up in a very white neighborhood. So it's just like all these things, like at home, what can you do? Like, I get into it with my parents. Now they try not to talk about racism in front of me, because like we got into a really bad shouting match in North Carolina a while ago when I tried to explain to them, what this commemorative plaque meant. And they were like, well, we've had it really bad. And I'm like, okay, it just becomes Oppression Olympics. And that's not the point, right? It's just like, you don't understand. And unfortunately, that's a personal choice, and you deal with you do what's comfortable. There's no right or wrong approach, because you have to protect yourself. So if you're not comfortable confronting people, you shouldn't, right? You should only do something like, I could stay employed. I could continue in a corporate environment. I did not want to do that. I'm like, I bless, God bless all the minorities who stay in a heavily white inhabited workforce. Good for you. I cannot do that. I made my money, I invested smartly, and I bounced. I was like, I've had enough. Like, I've just been so turned off by the lack of cultural alignment. I cannot, for the value of a paycheck, continue. Right. So that's why I have my own business. So you do what's comfortable for you, that you think is the way that's going to keep you sane, safe, secure, financially secure. You do what's in your realm of privilege, because at the end of the day, taking care of yourself, surviving, that's already a big accomplishment, getting what you want.
Absolutely. Maida and Stacy, you're both shaking your heads. And I know, Maida, it's super late for you right now.
No, that's all right. Yeah, I think the one point that has been like ruminating here is, in terms of when we were talking about like the leadership point, it also is the question of like, who defines what leadership means, and like and why is that a leadership character? So I think
Mm.
like for me, I mean, and we were talking about like exhaustion as well. It is not easy to always like question and scrutinize like at every single moment. So there is that I recognize as well. But for me, at least, this is my job. I get paid to do it, and this is the work that I want to do. So I think like there is that nuance in there as well in terms of like this topic of like the burden of education, where I think sometimes like the DI space is still dominated by white folks, and and sometimes I think they take that like, oh, you don't want the burden of education, here, let us take it for you, and then they profit off of it, and that's just not like the right approach. And I think there are a lot.
Oh, I think we might have.
Oh, sorry. I was
There
saying
you
like,
are.
for folks who, there are lots of folks of color who want to be in the DEI space, and we have the capacity for it. We just want to get paid for it and not do this work for free. So there is that distinction there. And, but yeah.
Right. It was such a wonderful conversation. I know we can probably go on for a little longer about the topic. Ladies, you've been wonderful in sharing all your information. So my keynote is that while I tried to limit my own bias as much as possible by interviewing only women who I did not know and sticking to the same set of questions for ongoing interviews, it was impossible to completely remove my own personal experience from this discussion. Without it, I would have not been able to undertake it in the first place. So the continual theme surfaced that if true equality in the workplace is what we are after, then sooner or later, we will have to tackle the issues that are distinctive to us. And that's what Dandan was saying. What is distinctive to you? And especially in the workplace, we need to recognize we're not alone. I know that many of you are having Dandan is having lots of conversations. She's putting everybody in their place. Thank you, Dandan. I know that many of you are having transparent and courageous dialogues with the people around you and trying to figure out how you feel about all this. You must ponder that change starts with us. How you resolve those questions will be distinctive to you as women of color and of diverse backgrounds. This will reflect your personal and professional experiences through your own community and workspace. What is essential is that you do answer those questions. We uncovered the results of code switching and how we had to do it as a necessary means of survival. Go through the process. Think of it. Give yourself some grace. We will continue having a united front. Transparency and authenticity is key. We need to be true to ourselves. We can fundamentally create that transformation. Take your drawbacks and turn it into something others can find valuable. We must keep having these courageous conversations about DEI. Where they will take us, we don't know. At least we are here to help. Thank you again for listening. Follow me on LinkedIn. Share your feedbacks. We cannot wait to hear from you. This has been another epic moment, and there's more to come. Thank you again.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rochelle.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.